In the late summer of 1917, the British Army's main offensive on the Western Front was the Third Battle of Ypres, probably more commonly known to history as the Battle of Passchendaele. And whilst it's called a battle, it was more of a campaign, a series of battles which started on 31st of July and famously ran all the way through into November. The 2nd Battalion of the Essex Regiment was not to take part in this offensive until the early October at the Battle of Poelcappelle. Whilst earlier battles such as the Battle of Pilkin Ridge, Menin Road and Polygon Wood, to name just 3, were taking place, the battalion stayed down on the Arras battlefront, and as per earlier episodes, had carried out a series of trench raids and had been holding the line there. Now, speaking of other episodes, I'll do the YouTube thing and say please do like and subscribe. As you can see here, most people that are watching my content aren't actually subscribed, and I'd recommend that you do for a couple of reasons. One is to make sure that you don't miss any future episodes that are coming, and there are still more to come. 1918 is quite a busy year for the battalion. I'm also considering doing a series on the Third Ypres itself as a battle, and also the work of the Royal Army Medical Corps, so let me know if any of those are of interest. The other reason I ask you to subscribe is it gives me a little bit of encouragement, and thirdly, apparently it helps with the algorithm of YouTube, helps more people find the video. So please do like and subscribe, as all the YouTubers say. Now, during this period where they've been out the front line, the second Essex was quite likely involved in a lot of training. In February 1917, the British Army had issued a new pamphlet of what we could call doctrine to reorganise the fighting rifle platoon. The 4 sections, or squads as they'd be known in other armies, were to be organised in specific roles, and there would be a machine gun section using a portable light machine gun called the Lewis gun. Another section would be rifle bombers who could fire grenades from their rifles. There was a 3rd section, actually specialist bombers using normal hand grenades, and then the 4th section would be a section of riflemen who would also double up as bayonet men if they got into the enemy's trenches. Now, whilst it was issued in February 1917, I suspect this was too soon for the battalion to have adopted it for their attack at Arras in April 1917, and as there's lots of references to training in the war diary, I feel it's quite likely that the Battle of Poelcappelle in October 1917 would be the first chance for the 2nd Essex to put this into action. So Poelcappelle is a small village to the north-east of Ypres, approximately 10,000 yards or about 9 kilometres away from Ypres. The actual attack that the 2nd Essex took part in was happening just slightly to the northeast of this village. Now, whilst the earlier stages of the campaign had actually had problems with the weather being too dry and dust being created, by the time of the Battle of Poelcappelle, the conditions were more those that we think of with the battle, lots of mud and very difficult for anybody to move anywhere. In this attack, the Essex were to be one of the attacking battalions, and they were on the right-hand side of the brigade's frontage, with the 2nd Lancashire Fusiliers on the left, and the 2 other battalions in Sport and Reserve. Now, brigade headquarters was in the village of Langemark, which is just kind of off the bottom left of this map here. And the brigade objective was to push between Poelcappelle on the right and the Ypres-Stoughton Railway on the left. With battalion headquarters at Ferdan Farm, which is where this little green little drop thing is there. The idea was that A and B companies would lead, with C company in support and D company in reserve. And 0 hour was at 05:20 in the morning. Just before 0 hour, the British Army artillery put down a very heavy stationary barrage for approximately 4 minutes, and then the barrage started to creep ahead at the rate of 100 yards in 10 minutes. Obviously quite a slow pace due to the conditions on the ground. Now, as the men went over, they encountered severe rifle and machine gun fire from a point near the railway, which was to their north, and at this early stage, both Lieutenant Colonel Pratt, the battalion commander, and the adjutant went down wounded, along with the commanders of A and C company. Now, the first objective was taken, but the left of the battalion was held up by machine gun fire from blockhouses or pillboxes, and this is just a representative picture. And these were at the northeast end of Poelcappelle, which remained unsubdued as the 11th Division hadn't kept up. Now, more than this, a gap of approximately 200 yards started to appear between the divisions, and it took some time for this advance to be resumed. However, the Essex were managed to move forward, and though they were short of the final objective, they were able to take up positions in shell holes. Now, the casualties were severe. 17 officers had been injured, of whom 7 were killed. One of those killed was Captain L.W.L. Cadic, Military Cross, who actually died of wounds, and he is buried now in Cement House Cemetery. was also Captain R.H. Lowe, who was killed. Second Lieutenant F.W. Legg was killed. Second Lieutenant H.A. Keell was missing, believed killed, and that was actually true. Second Lieutenant J. for Gerard Williamson was missing, believed killed, and that was also true. Now, Gerard Williamson had actually been a dental student at Guy's at the outbreak of the war, and he'd actually already been a volunteer in the territorial forces for approximately 2 years and served as a private with those. However, ultimately he was commissioned into the Essex Regiment and find his way to the 2nd Essex. There was also a Second Lieutenant W.A. missing, believed killed, and that was found to be later true. And in the picture on the left here is Second Lieutenant G.B. Hobbs, who died of wounds. Speaking of wounds, Lieutenant Colonel A.G. PRATT, D.S.O, had been wounded. Captain E.G. Griffiths had been wounded. Captain J.R. Paxman was wounded. Second Lieutenant C.H. Stanley was wounded. Now, C.H. Stanley was someone we've met in a previous episode, carrying out trench raids, and he was actually wounded as the battalion moved up into the line towards Ferdan House, which has already been mentioned. Second Lieutenant G. Classy, Second Lieutenant L. Panifer, Second Lieutenant A.E. Chapman, and Second Lieutenant R.M. Ingram complete the wounded list amongst the officers. Now, between the 9th and the 14th of October, the casualties amongst the other ranks haven't actually been broken down, but it would appear there was 274 other ranks wounded, of which 42 were killed. This is according to the war diary and the regimental history. 144 were wounded, 25 were missing, 4 were gassed, and 3 soldiers were wounded but remained at duty. There was a further 56 evacuated to the hospital. Now, looking at the modern records of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, we can see there was actually a total of 67 fatalities across the 9th and the 10th of October during the period of the attack. One thing that is noteworthy here is that a number of the officers, whilst they were serving with the 2nd Battalion, were actually nominally with other battalions, and this kind of caused a bit of a quirk with the database you can see here from researching the casualties. Something else noteworthy is that most of the casualties have no known grave and are commemorated on the Tynecott Memorial. Now, whilst every person has a story, one particular interesting story is that of Private A.A. Crow. And as we can see in the Commonwealth War Graves Commission details here of the additional information added, he was the son of Arthur and Edith Crow of Woodford Green, Essex. He'd been educated at Ilieve Farm School, Harrow and Hallenbury College, and enlisted in the Artist Rifles in August 1914. He was ultimately commissioned into the Loyal North Lancs Regiment, but due to ill health had to resign his commission in July 1916. Having recovered and not being able to pass a board so that he could rejoin as an officer, he was that keen to get himself back out to the fighting that he agreed to enlist as a private soldier and was killed on the 10th of October 1917, serving with the 2nd Battalion in the Essex Regiment. It's noted in the war diary and regimental history that the enemy barrage didn't come down for a few minutes after the attack began, and therefore most of the casualties were actually from rifle and machine gun fire. And the regimental history states it's likely that the casualties would have been even heavier if the German artillery had responded earlier. Now, I haven't found a specific reason for this, but it's possible that British artillery fire included effective counter-battery fire, and this is what had stopped the Germans firing so quickly. The battalion was to remain on this blood-soaked and sodden ground they'd won for the day, and in the hours of darkness reorganised themselves, fearing a German counter-attack. During this time, touch was regained with the division on the right, that's the 11th Division, and there was actually no German counter-attack. There was a great deal of activity spotted, particularly around a location called Requette Farm, which you can see is in the top right-hand part of this image. The battalion was ultimately relieved by the Household Battalion and moved back, but only as far as its support trenches. And it was during this relief that 2nd Lieutenant Gilbert was killed. Because of the earlier injury to Lieutenant Colonel Pratt, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson returned to take over command of the battalion on the 10th of October. Looking through the war diaries, both of the battalion and of the brigade, there are a number of notes where letters of congratulations have been passed to the battalion and to the brigade from correspondingly higher up in the British command system. And we can see here that there's kind of things about trying conditions and performance was marvellous and various kind of salutary messages. and then it moves on to a tiered system here, taking it all the way up to the Army Commander and the General Officer commanding the 5th Army, which the division was serving with at the time. Now, once the 2nd Essex were pulled out of the Battle of Poelcappelle, they would have a fairly quiet winter ahead, although they were to suffer with an outbreak of mumps, and they were returned down to the Arras area, where once again they'll be involved in trench raiding, and we'll see more of this in the next episode.